Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
Just enjoying the quote-unquote off-season. It's been
a
slow time.
Those 2 days of off, not even honestly. What do you get? The season ended Monday, right? Monday,
Yeah,
last Monday.
Got back Tuesday. Exit interviews Wednesday.
Yeah, people talk
Beal
Wednesday.
Beal stuff exploded the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, you got like the weekend. That was pretty much it. Until what day did the Beal trade actually go down? Sunday.
It happened Sunday, but Saturday kind of.
Yeah, so you got like Thursday, Friday. Those were your days. That was the off season.
It was fun. It was a fun time.
Yeah, you do anything? Go on vacation. Went to Flanagan's.
I unpacked. That's what I did.
Yeah, there you go.
And then the off season ended.
All right. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about this week. Good to be back after the off season. Got some trade stuff to talk about. That's obviously what we'll start. We'll also hit on the draft at the end. This will be your last minute draft preview. I'm sure a lot of Heat fans feel the same way, where the season ended 10 days before the draft. You remember the Heat actually have the 18th pick, so it's like kind of a valuable pick. Like that guy could very well be an important guy for the Heat. And all of a sudden it's like, I got to learn about some of these guys. Anthony and I are in the same boat. So we'll talk about some guys we like, what they could maybe do with that number 18 pick. But first, let's start with Bradley Beal, just because we're going to mostly talk about Dame, I think, but let's start with Bradley Beal because that is the news of the week. The Heat were involved. Beal ends up, and also I want to rant about the whole situation from a Washington perspective. Beal ends up going to Phoenix in exchange for nothing, pretty much. Chris Paul, who it sounds like is going to be rerouted somewhere else in a trade. Landry Shamet, and a bunch of second-round picks. Obviously, a divisive moment in the Heat fandom. It seemed like the Heat certainly could have bested that package if they wanted to. There were reports that there were some offers on the table from Miami. I don't know what you were able to kind of confirm or not. But my question for you, do you think the Heat missed on Bradley Beal, or did they just pass on him?
I think we're going to see – I think it depends on what happens the rest of the offseason, right? Like if the Heat can get Damian Lillard or some other star, then maybe the Heat just passed on him, right? But if they can't get a star and they miss out again –
well, I just mean from their perspective right now.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like they – like, because, again, that's an offer they certainly could have, I would think, invested.
This is what I know. Okay, so they obviously did not want to include Tyler Hero in the deal.
Okay,
that was number one, which not a surprise, right? Beal, as good as he still is, his contract is not great. He has
Tyler Hero is honestly pretty much as good as him.
Yeah, so like what? I'm not surprised that they don't want to include Tyler Hero. I don't think that was a bad decision. The offer that I heard that they made to Washington was Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, and at least one first-round pick. I think the Athletic reported there were 2 or 3. I heard at least one. I didn't get the specific amount, but that was, that's it's built around the expiring contract of Kyle Lowry, but then the Washington would have had to accept 2 to 3 more years of Duncan Robinson's salary.
Right.
And it seems like Washington wanted basically
a hard reset as much.
Just a hard reset, right? And that's what Phoenix gave them. I mean, the Heat could have offered Victor Oladipo and Kyle Lowry and picks, and that would have been 2 expiring contracts, and that probably would have gotten the deal done. But it seems like the Heat did not want to go that route, because then you have not only Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero's big contracts, but then you have Beal and Duncan Robinson's big contracts for the next 2 or 3 years. You're in bad salary cap shape.
Yeah.
So I think the Heat were like, look, we're gonna have a line. We'll give you Kyle Lowry his expiring contract. We'll give you, let's say, 2 first-round picks. But you have to take Duncan's money. We'll take on Beal's not great contract. But they weren't going to just take Beal's contract while also keeping Duncan, because it was just too much money on the books for the next few years with everyone else they have on their roster. So I think that was kind of the difference between why Washington ended up choosing Phoenix over Miami, because they wanted the hard reset and they didn't want to be on the hook for that Duncan Robinson money for the next 2 or 3 years. Now, Phoenix didn't give him first-round picks, but they gave him 6 second-round picks, right? So I know that there's like, some people have said that's equivalent to 2 first-round picks. So that's probably why Phoenix had to.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, but that's probably why Phoenix had to give up 6 because they had to kind of
right.
match that.
Yeah. Well, they had no first-round picks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think
there
that's
were
kind of
first-round picks in that deal if they had them. I'm sure.
That's kind of the background from what I know of what happened, what went down with that deal as far as Miami's end. I think also Miami definitely made a push for Bradley Beal, but I do think maybe their aggressiveness for Beal was kind of overblown a little bit. I think they obviously tried to get him, but they weren't going to be desperate. They weren't going to just basically do what trade whatever Washington wanted. Phoenix was by far the more aggressive team, and that's why they got him. And back to your question, I think the Heat passed on him because I think they could have gotten him if they wanted to.
Right. If, like you said, if they swap Oladipo for Robinson, that deal probably gets done. And again, like you could make a case that even with the you could make the case the Heat made the better offer, and the Wizards just chose the Phoenix. Like giving up first-round picks. Like I know Duncan Robinson, that contract isn't great, but he also was really good in the playoffs. And again, like who are the Wizards paying anyway? Like who cares if Duncan Robinson's taking up that cap hold? Like you're not going to be good for 3 years anyway, and then all of a sudden he's going to expire in contract, and you maybe get something for him. So the Heat made an offer. The Wizards chose the other one, and not the end of the world to me that they're not getting Bradley Beal, who hasn't been an All-Star since 2021 and has won one singular playoff game in his time as a number one option in Washington. It's not like I think it's very funny to me watching like a certain segment of Heat fans like treat Bradley Beal like he's a superstar when he's like not even an All-Star.
Yeah, I think the Heat have been linked to Bradley Beal for so long.
I know, right? It's funny.
and when that began, he was averaging like 30 points a game.
He scored 30 points a game. He was a third-team All-NBA.
Right. And look, Bradley Beal is still very good. He's still very good.
He's had injury issues. Like it's which again he's 30. It's not like you just write those off. But yeah, you could certainly see a bounce back coming for him at some point. But
yeah, he's a talented scorer, but. With the new CBA, I don't want to get into all the weeds of the new CBA, but
Phoenix, I want to get I kind of want to get into. I mean, I know Phoenix is in kind of the same cap situation the Heat would have been in, right? With if they had let's say they had done the swapped Oladipo in for Duncan, and all of a sudden you're locked into those 5 salaries that will put you way over the cap, and obviously you don't have any flexibility to really do anything else. How would that have changed like the next couple of years for the Heat? Because obviously they can't do much more than sign minimum guys this offseason anyway, right? How would if they had traded Oladipo and Lowry for Beal, how would things have been different for Miami this offseason and moving forward? What kind of challenges would it have presented?
This offseason, it wouldn't have changed much.
Okay.
Because you still would have had Lowry and Oladipo on the books, right, for similar amount of money as Beal this year. But the difference would have been moving forward past this season. Lowry and Vic are expiring contracts, so you're going to get off that money after this season. But if you would have traded them for Beal, all of a sudden you have that money. You're not getting off that money this season.
Yeah, those are your
next
5
4
guys.
years. Yeah, and that's it. And with the new CBA, there would have been pretty much a second apron team, if you're going to have Tyler Hero, Bradley Beal, and Bam and Jimmy making like over $150 million combined, right? You're going to be a second apron team, which means you don't have a mid-level. You can't after this season. The rules aren't as restricted, but after this season, so next off season, they wouldn't have been able to take back any extra money that they sent out in a trade. They wouldn't have been able to aggregate salaries in a trade, which is kind of crazy. So you can't trade Tyler Hero and Caleb Martin for Damian Lillard, for instance. You can't do that. It has to be 1 for 1. So basically, you can't make a trade for an expensive player. They obviously would have been paying a huge tax bill. And their flexibility would have been totally gone. So you really they had to. If you're making that move, you're sure this is enough because this is our team: Jimmy, Bam, Beal, and if Hero's still there, Hero. And you have to hope that that's enough to win a title because they really can't do anything else after that. And the Heat, I guess, decided A, it would have restricted them too much, and B, maybe they had questions of whether that was enough for them to really, win a championship moving, for years to come.
Yeah. Yeah, and Beal would have kept the. I mean, the reports are he still has the no trade clause.
Yes, which I think also I don't know for a fact that the Heat asked them if he would take that, but I'm assuming like I think Brian Windhorst reported that most of the teams involved kind of asked Bradley like, would you be willing to waive that no trade clause if we acquired you? And he said no, which is in his power. But
yeah,
I'm sure that was another thing that made the Heat hesitant. I mean, that's not only is it an expensive contract, but to have a player with a no trade clause that you can't get out of probably, even when he's like 34, 33.
He's going to be 34 years old making $57 million. Like
that's, I mean, imagine if you win a championship in the next 2 years, fine, it's worth it.
Who cares? Yeah.
Imagine if they don't and you have Jimmy and Beal making $100 million combined, and one is 36 and the other one is 34, 33. That's not great. So I think the Heat, it's clearly not going to act out of desperation, even though they know they need to add to this roster, and they know they probably need another scorer next to Bam and Jimmy to kind of go put themselves over the top. They're not going to out of desperation, and maybe that's because they know something about Damian Lillard. I don't know, right? Maybe there's always back channel communication between players, agents, all that. Like that just happens. Maybe they know there's a real likelihood, like a chance that Dame could ask out. But if Dame doesn't ask out, I honestly we could discuss this, but I don't know what they do.
Yeah. Because so that's the problem is eventually you run out of moves. But as we say all the time on this show, guys always become available. Obviously right now there's not a lot, but yeah, they seem to be they have to be all in on Dame right now because, eventually you just can't keep waiting. And as Jimmy is 33 years old and, eventually you got to take your swings. From a Washington perspective, has there ever been a more cursed run of 3 straight stars than Gilbert Arenas, John Wall, Bradley Beal?
No, I don't think so. And
the Beal era ended somehow worse than any of them. How do you literally attempted to kill Javaris Crittenton in the locker room, and at least they got John Wall out of that?
You grew up a Wizards fan. How do you feel about this move? Were you upset? Were you just you knew it was going to be bad, so just might as well just do it?
Yeah, I'm just happy it's over with. It's the worst. The last Ted Leonsis is a moron, and they literally gave him this extension a year ago, and with a no trade clause, and then it's just inexplicable.
I don't know if
they lost Kyle Kuzma for nothing. Kyle Kuzma opted out. They could have gotten the first round pick for him.
Could have traded him. Yeah.
Kristaps Porzingis, we'll see what he does. He is a player option.
That's an interesting one for the Heat.
It isn't
honestly. If the Heat go after him,
or just in a trade,
or in a trade. I could.
He fits pretty well. If you like the Olenek, I mean, that was the original theory with Bam, right? Yeah. I mean, even Kevin Love, right? The theory with Bam has always been another shooter.
And a rim protector, too.
And he's he's a much better defender than any of those guys that they have paired Bam with. Honestly, Porzingis was awesome last year. He had
a good year.
Bradley Beal was the 3rd best player in the Wizards last year. I mean, he missed a lot of time, but I felt great about the Kyle Kuzma experience and the Kristaps Porzingis experience. Not to give them long-term deals, which at least they're not going to do because that seemed like it was the Wizards' plan about 3 months ago was to give long-term extensions to Kuzma.
Go all into this roster.
So at least they're not doing that. Winger, we talked. I don't remember if we talked about that on when we were talking about Bradley Beal stuff on this show, but to me, them getting it's hard to blame Winger. If I was the Wizards, I probably would have taken the Heat deal and taken the 1st-round picks. Because like I said, who cares if Duncan Robinson's contract is bad for the next couple of years? You got to pay that money to someone anyway. And again, I think Duncan is it's still a couple of years left on that deal, so maybe it's not a super positive contract asset right now, but I think in a year or two, if he plays the way he did in the playoffs,
he's as an expiring.
The Wizards got something for Davis Bertans. They're similar. I mean, Duncan's better than Bertans. But they're in that same mold, right? Probably shooters who got overpaid in an era where we really overvalued just catch and shoot guys. But I'm as a Wizard I'm putting my Washingtonian hat on. Just glad they're going to start over.
Moving on.
Would have been nice if they did this a year ago when Victor Wembanyama was going to be the number 1 pick. Instead, as we're going to talk about soon, the draft falls off pretty dramatically after the top three or four or five. And the Wizards sit at number 8. So I don't know what they're gonna do. Don't know what the Heat are gonna do. Let's talk about what the next moves are. And Damian Lillard that's the hot topic now. Seems like Portland is really weighing all their options there, right? There's been some talk about could they trade that number 3 pick for Zion Williamson
or Bam Adebayo.
I can't imagine Pat took that call for very long.
Well, I mean, it would be an interesting package, honestly, but I wouldn't do it because that's the Heat are trying to win now. But number 3 pick, Anthony Simons, it's a lot. It's a lot, and more first round picks. I think
I'll say if the thing about this Lillard situation, which again, it seems like they're weighing all options. They want to try to keep Damian Lillard, use that number 3 pick to get a star, and try to win a championship with Damian Lillard there. Which, if I was them, I think that's what I would be trying to do too. He's one of franchise icon. If he could have a Dirk Nowitzki type late career championship, that makes everything worth it. But it feels like this episode is going to go up at 7 a.m. on Thursday morning, and it feels like within 24 hours we will know what the Portland's course of action is going to be, because if they draft Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller at number 3, I guess they could potentially work that guy into a future trade too, because it's such an obvious top 3. They're taking whoever's available out of Scoot or Miller.
Yeah.
But if they make that pick, it certainly seems like we move in a direction much closer to Damian Lillard will be traded to either the Heat or the Nets. It seems like as the 2 most likely teams.
Yeah, my theory is right now, obviously the ball's in Portland's court. Damian's kind of said, well, I want you to trade the pick for win now talent, right? And it's on Portland to kind of figure that out and decide what they're going to do. And the reports that keep coming out about what Portland's trying to do, obviously Dame said he loves Bam, he wants to play with Bam, that's his guy. Portland, there's a report out there saying that they want to trade for Bam. Yeah, exactly. There's a report out there that Portland's trying to get Bam and they want to make an offer to the Heat for Bam, and obviously that's not going to happen. And there's about the Zion stuff. I think my theory is Portland's trying to say basically through all these leaks, we're trying to get you these guys you want to play with, and at a certain point, they're going to be look, we tried. It didn't work out. We're going to have to draft, let's say, Scoot at 3. What do you want to do? We tried. And then they're going to put the ball in Dame's court, right? No, I feel like both of them don't want to say it, right? They just don't want to. They don't want to be the one to say, well, we're going to have to trade you, or I want to trade. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But yeah, if I'm Portland, honestly, this is the perfect opportunity for them to restart. You have you lucked into the number 3 pick. It's a really good draft at the top. If you can draft a guy like Scoot Henderson, you got to do that. If you get Zion, okay, you're a little better, but he's always injured. Is that really going to
on the Zion trade for them? Just take the one big swing. But yeah, if I'm New Orleans, I don't do that probably either. As good as Scoot is, and as much
he's not proven. He's not as proven.
Zion. Yeah. When Zion's been on the court, he's been awesome.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's possible that they could trade for Zion, basically trade Scoot, trade the pick and not get Scoot and have a chance at one of the best players in the NBA potentially. And Dame could still ask out in January, right? That's true. Things go bad and Zion gets hurt and he's missing most of the year, he could still ask out.
Then
so
you're really screwed.
Then you're screwed. Yeah.
First round pick, Zion's value is plummeted, and
yeah, and so I think it's leading up to my theory. This is not reporting, but my theory is that this is all going to lead to Dame saying, "Okay, I think it's time for a trade."
Yeah,
and whether he gets him or not, I don't know. Obviously, he said he's interested in playing for the Heat. He also said Brooklyn, but I think the Heat makes more sense for him because, what is if Brooklyn has to trade all those picks and let's say Bridges, let's say or anybody or really just any of those guys on Brooklyn that's gonna take to get that deal done, they're not gonna be as good as the Heat. The Heat can still keep Bam and Jimmy next to Dame, and they'll be a title contender even after the trade, right? They're not gonna trade Bam or Jimmy in that package. But Brooklyn, after whatever they send Portland, is not gonna be as good as Miami. So I think Miami makes more sense if Dame really wants to win a championship. Obviously, they heat up like 3 first-round picks. I think they get up to like 4 first-round picks. They could trade Portland if they want to do that.
Right.
They have Tyler Hero. They have basically, I think anybody except Bam or Jimmy would be on the table in that type of package. And the Heat would not show as much restraint as they did with Bradley Beal. I believe if Dame does become available, they'll go all in. As long as it doesn't include Bam or Jimmy.
Yeah, I think he doesn't have a no trade clause, like
right.
So,
yeah, but he has power.
Right. Yeah. So the Blazers could just take the Nets deal, but again, like he's one of the franchise icons. Like I have to think that. I have to think the Heat are the favorite in this situation.
I would agree
because I don't want to predict what an NBA superstar might think, but I have to imagine that the Blazers are going to take where he wants to go into consideration, assuming the offers are relatively comparable. And if I'm the Nets, I can't imagine that Mikal Bridges would be in that trade because, like, what do you do? Like, who cares if you get Damian Lillard?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You're the Blazers. You're the Blazers in the East now.
So, yeah, exactly. So, at that point, I think the Heat offer, well, still not quite as good as the Nets because they can't give up quite as many first-round picks. Probably not quite as good, but again, if you throw in Tyler Hero, like all of a sudden that's another valuable piece there and a young piece that you can, Tyler Hero and Scoot. That sounds like a kind of fun backcourt to me.
And they still have Simons.
And they still have Simons. I guess you're pretty guard heavy then, but who cares?
They have a lot of
You're going to be bad
guards,
anyway.
Yeah.
Again, so I think the Heat have to be viewed as the favorite because I have to imagine that Damian Lillard, when he sits down and if the Blazers sit down with him and say, where do you want to go? Again, like if he thinks about it for 25 seconds, that Heat situation is way better than the Nets situation, assuming what he cares about is winning a championship.
Just sounds like it's what he cares about this
Which
point.
I have to think he's 32 years old, like the end of his prime. It is interesting to see that it sounds like the Heat are way more open to going all in for Lillard than Beal, and I totally agree with that. Even though he's 3 years older, his peaks have been higher. He went to a Western Conference Finals one year. I know it was like kind of a weird run, but like he fits. I know like he's got some defensive flaws, all that kind of stuff. Like he's not a perfect fit for a Heat player, but to me, he's got I think the attitude. I think that.
Yeah,
Miami.
He would fit in
Beal,
well.
Maybe Beal has that, but we just haven't seen it at all. Like he has not ever seemed like a guy who cares about winning that much. Given how infrequently he plays and the fact that he decided to stay in Washington for like 5 years after John left.
Yeah, and Dame's offensive skill set just fits in. Is exactly what he needs, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, his peaks have been higher. He's been better recently than Beal. Like, he has made more sense to me the whole time. Now, if you don't get him, all of a sudden it's like, do we miss our chance here? But
that's the problem. And here's the thing, though, too, that I wrote about it earlier this week. But the new CBA really puts pressure on the Heat to get a trade done, like either this offseason or definitely before the February trade deadline, because next July, if the Heat are going to probably be over the tax for sure, they might be a second apron team. But let's say they're just over the tax. Starting next July 2024, they won't be able to take in more money than they send out in a deal, which basically means like now you can take up to 125% of what you send out, so you can take in a little bit more money. It will have to be either matching exactly or you can only take in less, which is very restrictive for a high spending team. Like usually teams that have a high payroll don't take in more money in a trade and add salary. And two, if they're over the second apron, which is definitely possible next year, they won't be able to aggregate salaries, which I mentioned earlier, which again almost makes it impossible. Like if you're going to trade for Dame next offseason, let's say Dame has out next August, they can't really trade for him unless it's for because you can't take in more money. So you have to trade up a bigger salary than Dame, and you can't combine players. So I guess maybe Jimmy Butler would do it, like that would fit, like that, but they're not going to do that. So this is the window right now for them to make a trade, and that's why if Dame doesn't ask out, or if they don't get Dame, they're in a tough spot because, I mean, I guess, somebody else could become available, but they have to kind of make a trade now if they want to do that, because next summer it's probably going to be very hard for them to do it. And the way the books are set up, it's not like they have cap space to go after free agents. So a trade is really the only realistic way for them to add talent at this point. And if they don't, if next offseason that is going to be tough to pull off. So there is pressure on the Heat. While they're not acting out of desperation, as we saw with Beal, there is pressure on the Heat to get a deal done now because of the new rules.
Yeah, they didn't have to be desperate with Beal because Lillard was still sitting out there. And Paul George is another name that has come up recently. We'll see what the Clippers do. That's a very interesting situation because I would guess they want to just trade Paul George for another star-type guy and try to reshuffle a little bit. But also Kawhi, I think, has a player option next offseason, could become a free agent, which I would expect he's going to pick up just given the injuries, but you never know. So suddenly that Clippers situation could be headed toward a rebuild sooner than I think we think. So that's another one. Maybe, I mean, even Kawhi becomes an interesting name maybe at some point in the trade. For now they were not desperate for Beal, but they have to probably be a little bit more desperate for Lillard, or like you said, they risk just missing the boat entirely. Yeah,
that's why. I mean, it's such an interesting Heat offseason for that reason. It's like, yes, they're limited in what they can do in free agency. They really can't go after free agents because they don't have, again, cap space. Since they're above the tax, they don't have an exception to offer, or above the second apron, they don't have an exception. But they're on track to be above the second apron. They don't have an exception to offer free agents. So really, they only have minimum contracts that they can go use again for outside free agents. So if they don't make a trade, either it's going to be bringing back most of this core, right? And kind of quote unquote running it back with some minor changes around the edges, or B, just filling the roster out with minimum deals, which I don't think the Heat will do, right? If it comes down to that, like I would imagine at the very least, like they'll bring back either Gabe or Max, some of their own free agents if they can't make a trade. But yeah, it's like either they get a big name and make a big splash, or really either they take a step back or they just bring back a lot of the same roster. There really isn't much of an in-between.
Okay, let's wrap up with some draft talk. Obviously, we're going to talk about a couple guys, but I guess we should start with just like this pick could be in a Damian Lillard trade, right? But within like 12 hours of us talking about this, and even if it's not, even if they don't necessarily trade the pick, I guess the player could be part of the trade potentially too. If the trade happens quickly enough right before the player signs. So that's, I guess, the first thing is like they got to just, this might ultimately all be irrelevant. But again, like we said, 18, that's a pretty valuable pick, whether it's in a trade or I would guess the Heat are gonna try to find a guy who can help them right away. Again, with acknowledging that this guy's ultimate destiny might be to be a trade chip. But I don't know, any names that have caught your eye in your 12 hours of thinking about draft picks?
12 hours of draft prep?
Yeah.
One guy, just based on need, I think, one guy that caught my eye, and 18 might be a little early for him, but he's risen on the draft boards a little bit over the last few weeks, and he was impressive in the combine. Olivier Maxence Prosper, a forward from Marquette.
Yeah.
6'7" with a 7'1" wingspan. A young junior. He's only 20. So he has the frame I think that he need. Like even Pat Riley in the season press conference mentioned that he needs more wing length and size. And obviously Prosper would provide that at 6'7" with long arms. Very athletic. That he needs athleticism. Really good defensive, like projects to be really good defensively on the NBA level. Very versatile, good lateral quickness. I was watching a clip of him where he's picking up a guy full court, and he kind of was able to stay with him, which he loves to do, obviously. So he kind of fit really, really well into the defensive system. Yeah. Offensively, there's some questions about his shooting, which is obviously concerning because he needs shooting. But even that seems to be improved. He shot really well, and in his workouts in front of scouts and all that. I think he shot the ball well at the combine too in the scrimmage. So it seems like his shot is improving. So I don't know. He's a guy that just fits kind of what the Heat probably need on their roster at this point. He can play both forward spots. The ringer compares him to PJ Tucker, which is obviously a name that he are familiar with.
Yeah.
I think he's more athletic than PJ Tucker. We'll see if he develops into the shooter that PJ Tucker, was or is. But he's just a name that just, I think, if he's there, it just makes sense. He feels like a Heat guy just because of his defensive ability.
Yeah, the interesting thing I think about a guy like him, and there's probably a couple other guys just when we talk about some forwards, if you're talking about need for the Heat, one, he can help you probably early on because, like, if he can defend, I know defense is hard to translate to the NBA sometimes, but if he can defend, he helps you as a role player early on, and then with Caleb who will presumably be the starting power forward this year, I would guess. Going into the last year of his deal, you're going to need, that 4 spot has been a night, like, kind of the role player spot for the Heat, and that guy has, I think, fits some of that. Do you expect, and I'm sure it'll be kind of a last minute decision, kind of, but like need or just best available because this guy could be part of a trade? Like, do you have a thought about what how the Heat might look at this pick?
The Heat, like, historically has been just about best guy available. Right?
Yeah.
But I think this team is so close, right, to being a championship contender. Or they were in the finals last year, so they are a championship contender, but just so close to a championship that I think at some point you have to think about need as well. You got to win. You're not in the business of waiting 3 or 4 years for a guy to either get into rotation because the Heat don't need that position. There's just no time for him in the to play, or for a guy to develop. He might be like Jovic, for instance, right? They did that last year where. Yes, I guess they still need a forward because PJ was going to leave, and I mean at that point we didn't know that, but PJ left, and they needed, obviously didn't have many power forwards, but he was obviously a developmental guy, a guy that wasn't ready right away. I think that he kind of need a guy that's going to fit a need, and is going to be ready, like you said, to contribute at least somewhat as a rookie. So I while they usually go best player available, I think this might be the year that they go for need.
Yeah, well, an interesting thing I would say is I'm looking at just like guys who are in like the 15 to 20 range, right? And obviously maybe like 25 or whatever.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of like full blown projects, I don't think, in that range. There's
some pretty good names. Yeah.
Because it's I think it's kind of a weak draft. I think I think guys who are a little bit more proven commodities are being valued in that range. There's some guys in their 20s in that range, like you mentioned. One of them being Maxence Prosper, like Chris Murray is 22. He's kind of projected in that range. Kind of a 3-and-D scorer, younger brother or twin brother, Keegan Murray. They're like the same age. I don't know who's older technically. But 22-year-old 3-and-D guy. Obviously, Keegan Murray had a pretty good rookie year. Chris Murray was an All-American. Jordan Hawkins, another guy who was like a really, really important piece of UConn's championship team. Montgomery County native, so I'll rep for him. Montgomery County Public Schools specifically.
Wow.
Although he did wind up at DeMatha, but I think he won a state championship at Gaithersburg High. Jaime Jaquez, another 22-year-old in that range. And then even like the one and done guys there, like I really like Kassan Wallace. Grady Dick I think had a pretty good year at Kansas.
Jett Howard.
Jett Howard,
Howard's son.
My only issue with Jett Howard is Michigan was terrible last year, and I kind of don't understand that. I think that might have been more a Jawan problem than necessarily the guys on the roster. But Jett, to me, like a guy who probably had like a slightly underwhelming freshman year just because he was the best player on the team. That team wasn't very good, but fills a clear role. He's a really, really good 3-point shooter. And good size too. He's not like a 6'4" 3-point shooter. He's 6'7".
Yeah, 6'8". He's listed as 6'8", 215. That's
he's got good size. Obviously, a local kid, played at U School, and grew up in Miami, being when Juwan was an assistant coach here. So, I don't know. It's it's not gonna be the sexiest pick they make here, obviously, because I don't think there is there's not a Giannis, right? There's not just like a freak guy who's like, who knows what this guy's going to be. Most of these guys here have a clear skill, right? We've seen them play it. They were all, for the most part, like good college players, like maybe not great college players, but like Kassan Wallace, 14 points a game. Or, Hood Schifino, 14 points a game. Grady Dick, 14 points a game. Chris Murray, 20 points a game. Like, all these guys were, like, good college players, if not, like, maybe not necessarily great. Some of them were great, but, like, none of these guys are projects. So, I think the Heat are going to be able to at least get someone who helped them here. Again, but I think the most value this pick probably has is a guy who could maybe be part of a Damian Lillard trade, because the Heat are probably not going to be drafting higher than 18th anytime soon if you make a trade like that.
For sure. And the Heat have had success in the first round, obviously, recently. I mean, you go back to Bam. I think the last 4 picks: Bam 2017, Hero 2019, obviously 2 home runs at those slots.
Mm-hmm.
Precious in 2020, which he didn't have a long Heat career, but they turned him into Kyle Lowry, right?
And he's been good
he's been decent. Yeah, he's been a rotation player for Toronto. And then Jovic, obviously, we don't know yet, but it seems like at that, I think they were what did they pick him at 26, 27 last year, like 28 maybe. Like for a late first round, like there's some intrigue there of what he can be, right? Mm-hmm. So they've had success in the first round recently, and we'll see if they can do it again.
They haven't missed on a first round pick, like, I don't know.
I mean, before that it was Justice. Like I think before Bam, Justice was the last.
Like maybe they should have made that trade, but
yeah, but it didn't completely.
But Justice is still a good player, yeah.
Right. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, and like I said, there's a chance they could trade it. And I think because the Dame thing, like we don't know yet what he's gonna do, and he might not make the decision until tomorrow night, or even after tomorrow night, after he thinks about it, sleeps on it, or maybe takes a few days to think about what he wants to do. Like the Heat might ultimately make the pick, and maybe after that it gets traded, right? Like we saw that, we've seen that before. Or maybe the talks begin during the draft and the Heat pick for Portland, but the trade doesn't get done until July if Tyler Hero's included, because Hero has the poison pill, I think, until July 1st.
And then the trade would have to be made before the player signs, right? Because once a rookie signs, so
like 30 days. I mean, they could just wait 30 days and do it in August.
They could do it in August, yeah.
But I would think if there's even a thought that he could be part of a trade, like that was the whole thing last year with the whole Kevin Durant thing. Like, is Jovic going to sign? Is he not going to sign? Yeah. And then once everyone's like, oh, no, he's not part of the deal. The deal's not going to happen. So I'm sure there'll be one of those storylines again of like, will the Heat's first round pick sign? What does that mean if he does sign? Is it over? So a lot of moving parts. But I think at this point, I would expect the Heat to at least make the pick, but I don't know if that means they keep the pick. We'll see about that.
Yeah. So you like the Marquette guy? That's your pick?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple other. I mean, a couple of the mock drafts have him taking Nick Smith from Arkansas.
Yeah, Nick Smith, who was literally the number 1 recruit in the country last year. Sometimes just don't overthink it and take that guy, right? I don't know if he totally fits with what the Heat need necessarily, right? Another shooting guard. But I mean, might have as high a ceiling as pretty much anyone in this draft. So
yeah, a couple other guys at Cason Wallace.
I love Cason Wallace. He's like the one guy that I watched from this range and was like, oh, that guy's really good. Like, he was the best player in Kentucky. I know Kentucky underachieved this year, but like Kentucky guards, they always work out. There's never been a bust. James Young is like it.
For sure. And Jed Howard. Who's another guy like that I told you about?
Grady Dick. I thought he's probably gonna go higher.
Grady Dick as well. I think those 3 plus the Marquette forward. Those are the names that stick out to me when I kind of went over them. But yeah, I think Grady Dick is probably gonna be. It seems like, according to most mocks, is gonna be taken before the Heat's spot. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for the guys who are like All-Americans in college. Those are the Chris Murrays, the Jaime Jaquez. Older guys though, so I don't know necessarily if those are going to be in the Heat's wheelhouse. Colby Jones from Xavier is another guy I like. So we'll see. It's interesting. I mean, it's I don't think it's a great draft. I think, like I said, there's 3 guys, and then depending on how you feel about the Thompson twins, and Cam Whitmore is another guy who I've seen. I think Sam Vecini from The Athletic has him as a number 3 prospect ahead of Brandon Miller.
Wow.
Or at least has him like 3A, 3B. But after the top 3, it's like fascinating draft just because you could see any kind of combination of picks occurring. Yeah, it does have Cam Whitmore number 3. I'm looking at his thing now.
Wow.
But Also going to be a great draft for South Florida, which Jet Howard is part of. Could be 4 first-round picks from South Florida, which would, I think, 4 guys drafted would be a record for South Florida, let alone 4 first-round picks. And it seems like 3 lottery locks with the Thompson twins and Taylor Hendricks from UCF.
It sneaky. South Florida's sneaky becoming a basketball.
Yeah, we talked about it after the
powerhouse.
Yeah, after Miami's tournament run. Of course, Miami did it without a single Florida guy on the roster, but
right. But it's not just
FAU had
FAU, yeah. And not just this draft too. It's like the Boozer twins.
Right? Yeah, they're Cam is he's going to be the number 1 pick in 2 years, I guess.
That's and you Gatorade Player of the Year. He's probably going to be the top pick in a couple of years. I mean, Miami really or South Florida isn't known for that, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of all new to them over the last few years of all this happening basketball wise.
The Thompson twins were part of the craziest single game I've ever covered as a sports reporter. When they won the state championship, I think in 21. And I think Azar fouled out with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They blew a big lead. It was basically those 2 guys and a bunch of guys who looked like me on the team. Good shooters, right?
Right.
Certain type of profile.
But normal high school player. Normal
players, Pinecrest players. Azar fouled out. They blew a big lead, and I think they were down 8 with a minute left in overtime, and Amen scored 8 straight points to force double overtime, and they won. And he finished with 43 points in the championship game. So they're really fun to watch. I wish they could wind up in a situation where they're playing together because they're both insanely athletic and point guards essentially, or shooting guards at least. So they just throw full court alley-oops to each other all the time. But I've talked to myself. I wasn't sure about them. They went to the G League or the overtime thing. What's their level of competition there? I've circled back where I'm back in on those guys is worthwhile. They make this a 5, 6, 7 player draft. Amen seems to be the higher ranked of the guys, but Azar was the MVP of that overtime league. So we'll see. Couple interesting guys at the top, and then who knows what happens. So,
one other thing, Isaiah Wong reportedly worked out for the Heat recently. So there's that.
I like him as a 2nd round pick. I like Jordan Miller as a 2nd round pick a lot.
Yeah, I like them both. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Heat don't have a 2nd round pick, but they
but you can
buy one. It's pretty easy to buy
or
one.
One of those guys might not get drafted. You never know
once
you get to the bottom 20 picks or whatever. So, yeah, all right. Gonna be a fun Thursday night. I love the NBA draft because I'm an idiot. But I'm fascinated to see what's gonna happen. In the 4 to 10 range, in the 18. But it reminds me of the top is better here, because we have Wembanyama, but it reminds me of the Anthony Bennett draft. What year was that? 2013, where it felt like no one had any idea what was going to happen. Which, again, the top number 1 is a lock. 2 seems like 2. There's some intrigue at 2 about whether it's going to be Scoot or Miller. And the betting lines have moved a couple times over the last couple of days. And then after that, it's all hell is going to break loose at number 4, I think.
Yeah. I feel like the Heat fans are probably more interested in what happens at number 3 than what happens at number 18, which is kind of strange, but that's just
it is true. Yeah, it's true.
Yep. Number 3 is going to be so
tell,
fascinating.
Right?
Yeah, that's going to be the tell of what's going to happen there. So,
but at the same time, Portland doesn't have in some ways, I think if they make the pick, it means I don't know, they trade Lillard, but at the same time, they're boxed in because they have the 3rd pick in a 3-player draft. It kind of doesn't matter.
Whoever's available.
Yeah, so they can make that pick in a second, and it doesn't matter because you're going to trade that guy, right? If you're.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think a lot of. I mean, I know, like I said, some Sam Vecini, Cam Whitmore is his number 3 prospect, but I think that's an outlier. I think most NBA teams would take whoever's left out of Miller and
Henderson. Yeah, I agree. It'll definitely be an interesting Thursday night and week, really, because there's just so much going on around the league. The NBA offseason is honestly almost just as active as the season most years, and this year is no different.
Yeah. All right. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. He's got that all covered for you this weekend and beyond. When free agency? What day does that officially begin?
June 30. So next
June 30, Friday.
Next Friday. Yeah.
Next Friday.
So next week we'll do a little free agency preview.
Yeah, well, we'll say. I mean, we'll have news, I'm sure, in some capacity, because the Damian Lillard situation will develop. I think, even if nothing happens, it'll develop.
Yeah, that's for. There'll be a lot of news between now and then. That's for sure.
All right, let's finish up there. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.